Okay, so yeah, I'm here with Ian, and we're going to talk about John Vervaeke's Awakening from the Meaning Crisis in his lecture series. It's episode 13, and in his book, it's chapter 12, and it's on Buddhism and parasitic processing. The basic thing is he's going to try to talk about what he thinks is a misunderstanding in the West of Buddhism and or real basic Buddhism, and what he thinks can be done about that, and kind of, yeah, linking it with cognitive science and explaining it with cognitive science and psychology, and sort of linking it with sort of his idea of Platonic anagoge or ascent, sort of like ascent from the cave in Plato's Republic. So we were gonna kind of just go through, give a summary of his lecture and chapter, and then kind of go just start discussing it, right? And Ian, you have a lot of experience and understanding of Buddhism, and so yeah, it should make for a pretty lively discussion.
Yeah, yeah. Before you start, I just want to sort of prologue that I have I've sort of studied Buddhism as a topic, not as an like a academic discipline, but just as on my own reading. I'm trying to understand what it means for a long, long time.
Mm,
And I've been a practitioner through Zen and a few other traditions since the mid 2000s.
mm.
And the unpacking the understanding of Buddhist terminology is something that's very important to me. I like understanding words and what they mean and what they're trying to point to. So I spent a long time developing my own framework around these concepts that is informed by all of the reading and all the studying that I've been doing, but I don't represent a particular lineage. I don't want to claim anything because it's something I've put together, and so I don't want to claim authority that I don't have. I also want to say I know a lot of Vervaeke's work is something I really like, but this particular take I personally disagree with. So I'm not disagreeing with the man. I think he's great. I think his work is amazing. I think he's doing a lot of good work in the world, better than I'm doing. A lot of respect to him. So this is just sort of a chemistry of ideas. And same thing with Stephen Batchelor. I don't know much about Stephen Batchelor. I know he comes into it, so I don't mean anything against him or his work. I don't know anything about him other than this particular podcast that the meaning crisis episode that I listened to. So
Yeah, thank you for saying that. Yeah, that I like that chemistry of ideas, and it sounds like we're just trying to be very responsible with these ideas and to understand them deeply, and to kind of expostulate them in the best way we can.
I hope so.
So at the beginning of it's in the episode in the chapter. I'll just use those terms probably interchangeably. He talks about the background, like earlier in the lecture series and the book. So they examined mystical experiences and higher states of consciousness through the lens of science. And they found that these states are pretty much universal, which that tells you a lot when something is cross-cultural. And they seem to have also a rational aspect. Now, some people emphasize the metaphysical content of these and come up with contradictory and results all over the board. There is a God, there is no God, there are, interdimensional dwarf-like beings that I've encountered, all this kind of stuff. But they don't get into that content, but it's more like we must accept that plausibility rather than certainty is the standard here. And that's kind of a theme with Vervaeke. Even in science, plausibility is emphasized rather than certainty when you're trying to judge whether something is knowledge or not. Uh, so yes, they will ignore metaphysical claims on or confirmable theories. So these states heighten our cognitive fluency, which is the ease of information processing. And cognitive fluency makes content seem more real and we learn it better. So it's a very important thing in life, and it's important that we kind of get it right. Uh, so that grants us life-altering insights that allow us to connect more meaningfully with ourselves and with other people. That's a quote. And with this framework, we can then understand the awakening of the Buddha. We can understand sati, mindfulness of the being mode, and we can have a project of overcoming systematic illusion that is analogous to the development from the child to the adult. So, uh, as the child is to the adult is to the sage. It's sort of the insight and the wisdom of the sage is to the adult, as that of the adult is to the child. And so that's not about propositional knowledge, but yeah, more like I said about insight and deeper understanding. Okay, so to talk about the crisis in understanding in Buddhism. Now, this is where we get into Stephen Batchelor's work. So he says that there is kind of like two ways in the West, supposedly, that we understand Buddhism. One is that we think you can only understand it from within a Buddhist tradition. And here, Vervaeke does emphasize perspectival and participatory knowing, which is very strong there. And he emphasizes those kinds of knowing for everything in Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. But there are so many traditions, it's kind of maybe hard to say, what Buddhism is from within. And then there's the other side is the in the West, which is the academic approach. Many of these people do not practice and they want to maintain objectivity. Um, and so they lose the participatory aspect when they're studying it that way. And he says that this split is like the problem that Socrates faced between the sophists on the one hand and the natural philosophers, the proto-scientists on the other. So the sophists had, they were sort of public speakers, uh, uh, practitioners of rhetoric that emphasized relevance of statements without concern for the truth, concern for the good. And the natural philosophers emphasized truth without relevance. They were trying to understand the natural world, sort of analogous to scientists scientists nowadays. But they didn't have a concern with what was relevant to human life and to developing wisdom. So, practicing Buddhism provides transformative relevance, and academic study searches for truth. Batchelor argues that we must overcome our biases so that Buddhism includes both aims. Nowadays, we tend to see both these approaches to Buddhism, like we do other things real and spiritual, as being about beliefs. And this is a point that Vervaeke kind of makes in general about other religions and everything, our misapprehension of maybe the best view of Christianity, too. So this is inherited from the post-Christian scientific enlightenment. Different kind of enlightenment, of course, than the Buddhist one. Uh, quote, breaking out of this reduction will be crucial for addressing the meaning crisis, unquote. So belief systems are attempts to create meaning, but they often fail because meaning occurs at lower levels. And so Batchelor says we must look at Buddhism existentially. So now this is basically Batchelor's kind of Buddhism. That's supposedly kind of trying to correct our idea of Buddhism in the West. So our understanding of Buddhism as a system of beliefs is not exactly wrong, but it's incomplete. And he tries to re reimagine or re-articulate the Four Noble Truths. So the Four Noble Truths are meant to help personal transformation, such as by higher states of consciousness, improved insight, cognitive fluency, affording a more optimal grip in the agent arena relationship. That's sort of like adapting optimally to whatever environment you're in. That's from Merleau-Ponty, and they are to help to achieve sati or remembrance and mindfulness. And so Vervaeke kind of uh, adapts Batchelor's four ennobling truths, and he calls them the four ennobling provocations. So he's trying to provoke our action, provoke transformation, rather than to initiate a belief. So the first noble truth is generally understood as all life is suffering or all is suffering. And so this could, on its face, kind of just seem untrue. If all is suffering, then nothing is particularly suffering, or, when you're happy, are you suffering too? So it's maybe a little bit hard to understand. So he says to suffer is to be set with the loss of agency in the world. And both pain and pleasure can do this. Quote, most of Buddha's metaphors are not about pain, but about entrapment uh, metaphors. So Buddha described enlightenment not in terms of relief from pain, but in terms of freedom, which is the opposite of entrapment, of course. So instead of all is suffering, he proposes to sort of formulate it like your whole life is threatened with the loss of agency. So this is related to Vervaeke's general teaching of that which makes you adaptively intelligent also makes you vulnerable to foolishness. So, for example, uh, let's say you have an experience and you interpret it as bad, and that sensitizes you to that in the future. You anticipate that kind of thing happening again. And since we cannot process everything, we have to rely on heuristics, mental shortcuts. And so those things are good. They help us to process information because the amount of information in the environment available at any one time is infinite. We have to have some kind of shortcuts. Those are good, except when they're not, of course. So memories encode something of what it is like to be you in your experiences. And this is adaptive since your brain is always trying to fit you to your environment. One bad state can recall another. So you start to look for more of this kind of thing to happen. And then when it does, your belief is confirmed. And so you start to form this negative valuation in of yourself or that particular something about that experience, and you're generalizing. And because of our heuristics, we misjudge probabilities all the time. Like famous example is that like we have an availability heuristic. So like it's easy to imagine a plane falling from the sky. And so we are much more afraid of dying in an airplane crash than we are of dying in a car on the way to the airport. But statistically, we're much more likely to be hurt in the second case. So moving on. Um, so dukkha is suffering is and parasitic processing and reciprocal narrowing. So heuristic judgments that we make all the time are emotional. They're not emotionally neutral. The brain projects a high probability of a negative event, and that produces anxiety that narrows and makes our framing more rigid. And then we have a lower ability to solve problems. You can see how this can happen in sort of a negative feedback loop, and you kind of come to some conclusion, something like I am doomed. Uh, Therefore, all of your life is threatened by dukkha. Um, the brain can get into all sorts of negative spirals like this. So he relates this to Dr. Lewis's model of addiction, which is not about chemicals. Uh, and his model of addiction is that it is a loss of agency through reciprocal narrowing. So, for example, you start taking a drug and you lose some of your cognitive flexibility, and the number of options in the world declines. As the options decline, the variability in your cognitive agency goes down. The world feels less accessible and scarcer, and you start to get more and more stuck inside yourself. There's a famous quote that sort of expresses this from C.S. Lewis is that the doors of hell are locked on the inside. So yeah, dukkha could be understood in that parasitic processing happens within, and then reciprocal narrowing happens without. So you do want your system to be self-organizing because you cannot do all things consciously. But that nature of being self-organizing and the other things that characterize our psychology also makes us prone to suffer. So the second noble truth is often understood, is typically kind of formulated as suffering is caused by desire. And Batchelor reformulates that as realize that you can recover your agency. How can you do that? If there is one of these downward spirals, there is therefore also an upward spiral, and that's anagoge. That's Platonic. That's a Platonic version of enlightenment. That's as he talks about in the Republic, an ascent out of the cave of illusions into understanding of the truth itself. Um, yes, a pernicious dynamical system is countered by another type of dynamical system, and it would tutor and one that would tutor my beliefs, but also provide altered states of consciousness, help develop skills and character, which of course Vervaeke talks about throughout the series. And so there's a model of the eightfold path, the eightfold path, and which is generally right thinking, right understanding, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration, which he divides into cognition, character, and consciousness. And typically the eightfold path is represented as a wheel, and that's a counter to dukkha's grinding wheel, and it's a self-organizing system that kind of turns itself, although you have to work on each individual spoke on its own. And the right in those right understanding, right thinking, and everything is as in a right hand, a sort of optimal grip, understanding. And so, yeah, so in summary, realize that the threat and the possibility of living in a dream, a quote, blithe, modally confused life beset by agentless influence is real, but also realize that there is the possibility of a life beyond all of that. So that's kind of a real rough and ready kind of take on Vervaeke's take, along with Stephen Batchelor, of maybe Buddhism and sort of the misunderstanding of Buddhism in the West, as I understand it.
Let me
Currently.
respond with a critique of my understanding of all of that.
Yeah.
Uh, from my understanding of all that. I mean, I'm just not sure where to start, man. Like, um, what he's pointing to is a good thing. Like the finding a way to pop out of that narrowing spiral, um, finding agency, being, effective in turning your life around in a good direction, like developing character and skill and wisdom, like all of that's good stuff. And I don't think that Buddhism is against all of that, but so much of that does not spring from the way the Buddha taught that process. Um, the very fact that he like this comes in the beginning and it comes in at the end. He talks about getting a grip on things. And in Buddhism, like the the Four Noble Truths are life is suffering, suffering is caused by grasping. You can free yourself from grasping, and you do that through the Eightfold Path. Grasping is the cause of suffering. Grasping is the thing that causes um, discomfort, not the parasitic processing that he's talking about. What the Buddha meant by dukkha is a much more subtle thing than the
Mm.
patterns that he's talking about. Um, and to say that the goal of practice is to have a better grip or a right-handed grip feels very much to miss the mark for me because first of all, he holds up the right-handed grip as opposed to right concentration being like morally right, you know? And so he's like, well, it doesn't mean morally right. It means having a good grip on concentration or livelihood or whatever. And I would argue that the word right there is meant to be understood as sort of objectively correct and aligned with with wisdom. It's not a grip. It's right like a straight line is right. It's right like the right way to go about something. It's not morally correct to lay a foundation before you build a house. And neither is it like gripping some concept correctly. It's just how you go about doing it.
Hmm.
There's no gripping.
The
There's
best
no
way.
yeah. There's no enforcement. I mean, I'm not even sure I quite understand what he means by right-handed grip there, but what if you're left-handed, you know? Um, but yeah, that was the whole idea of gripping was one of the things because in Buddhism, let's see if I can look this up really quick. I think I had saved some pages. In Buddhism, one of the things that I find really helpful is looking up the original sort of etymology of the oh, I didn't save that one. Shucks. The etymology of the original Pali words. So like dukkha is from the Pali.
Mm.
Um, not Sanskrit. Sanskrit's a little bit different. Most Buddhist phrases come from Pali, which is sort of after Buddhism had left India and moved into Southeast Asia.
Mm.
Um, I think that's where they spoke Pali, if I'm remembering correctly. And most of what we now have of early Buddhist scripture was preserved. The originals were preserved in Southeast Asia. So the Theravada tradition in Southeast Asia, Burma, Thailand, not Vietnam so much, although I'm sure there's some there too. But that's a certain form of Buddhism.
Mm.
Um,
Mm.
that's sort of the earliest form of Buddhism that people historically think map onto most closely what the Buddhists taught.
Mm.
What you have in just as a brief aside, what you have in like China and Japan, and throughout the world, but Chinese Buddhism. So you think like the Shaolin Temple as an example of that. Japanese Buddhism, Zen, obviously, and a strong part of the Tibetan tradition. That's all considered Mahayana. So it's a later development, hundreds of years after the Buddha's time. It's a further flowering of the teaching.
Hmm.
And then you have the Vajrayana, which is definitely what Tibet is all about. And there's some Vajrayana other places. There's a strong school. There's a school of it in Japan. No, what was it? Shingon Buddhism is Buddhist, sort of Buddhist Vajrayana, and
Hmm.
that's a further elaboration of the teaching. So it's sort of like a third flowering of it.
Hmm.
And so if we're talking about the meaning of the core terms, we want to go back to that original first expression
Hmm.
from the Buddha. Um, and if we talk about dukkha, I will say Vervaeke does mention this. He says dukkha is the etymology of it is to an uncomfortable axle wheel. So yeah, axle on a wheel, the wheel's turning. If the hole that the axle is in is not smooth, if there's something sticking in there, every time the wheel turns, you sort of have this bump or this jolt, and you've got this uncomfortable ride.
Hmm.
And dukkha just means that kind of discomfort. Um, and the Buddha talked about dukkha as both. So 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 when he says, I need to not just spitball all of this stuff. I'll stop after dukkha, and I'd love some feedback or something to break it up. But when he says all of life is suffering, he never said suffering. He said all of life is dukkha. All of life is an uncomfortable ride. And held up against dukkha is sukha, which means sweetness. And it means a smooth ride. It means when your axle hole is nice and smooth and the wheel turns smoothly and you don't have any jolts and bumps and like everything goes along well. Now, he didn't say enlightenment is sukha. So he wasn't too concerned with relief, as they said. He was concerned with freedom, but he was teaching to a group of, to a civilization that was very tied up in the idea of karma and reliving of cycles and trying to free yourself from those cycles. So his whole teaching is sort of couched in that understanding more so than maybe the Platonist or the Mediterranean understanding of like a cave and a rational escape from the cave and a seeing of the light of rationality and a better understanding of the world. Um, well, okay, so to return to dukkha, to say that all of life is dukkha means that every experience you have has a little sense of irritation or dissatisfaction to it. Whether that's, you know, your dog getting hit by a car or me sitting in this chair right now, my back's a little sore, you know, or even just my foot's on the ground and I can feel the sensation of my foot on the ground. And that sensation coming into my foot is a little discomforting. Like it's disturbing my peace. It's pulling me into samsara. It's pulling me into taking some sort of an action. Oh, maybe I need to move my foot this way. Maybe if I did it this way. And that's a very micro example of where so many of our other problems come from. Oh, I can't sit with this discomfort. So I have to run from it. The addiction metaphor or the addiction comparison is great. I can't sit with my grief because I feel like it's infinite and will kill me or overpower me. I cannot confront that discomfort. I have to run from it into alcohol, heroin, whatever, because this problem is unsolvable. What the Buddha says is everything, existence itself is marked by the flavor of dissatisfaction. You cannot find anywhere that is not dissatisfying. If you get really rich, you'll be unhappy. If you go and live in a cave, you'll be unhappy just living in a cave. If you go and live in a cave and you examine your own existence and your own experience, you can reach freedom from suffering, from grasping, from this pattern. But it's not freedom from depression. It's not a Buddhist, an enlightened being. Enlightenment is without condition. There are no conditions. And so to say that dukkha is avoided by creating the correct conditions just leaves people grasping for conditions. And then these conditions that they're in are unsatisfying. And so they seek other conditions. And then when they get those, they're unsatisfying because they've never turned back to address that dukkha is an inherent part of existence, at least so long as you understand yourself to be an agent in an arena, which Buddhism says you're not. So I'll stop there. You're not an agent. You're not in an arena. Um, all of that's an illusion.
Hmm. Yeah, that sounds good. That's interesting. So what you were saying about dukkha seems to kind of supports the sort of general understanding or translation of all is suffering. All is characterized by some type of uh, would you say, yeah, discomfort or something that is not sweet. And we we will very often want to run from that, run towards something else. We'll want to grasp the sweetness, we'll want to push away the discomfort in the foot or from grief or whatever it is. And we'll we'll seek for some other state. And that whole thing is kind of the problem. And that's, and that's the bumpy ride. We're getting different types of bumps and it's kind of, yeah, and mm. and then the answer, and then the sort of answer to that is sort of enlightenment, and that, yeah, that is unconditional. Yeah, it's not an agent in the arena. Yeah, I'm trying to understand those trying to combine those two things, but I can see how. I mean, one criticism I've heard of Buddhism is that it's sort of like it seems like they kind of want everybody to become a monk or something like that. And I know in his life, he sort of like he became a monk for the rest of his life and he converted his family, right, and other people and things. Um, and I guess just my superficial understanding of agent and arena is the idea. To me, this seems like a good way to understand how to be in the world, how to be, in sort of whatever in your culture are regular relationships, regular relations to other people, to some type of livelihood, to, living in a neighborhood, being a voter or whatever. There's like you're a consciousness and you have a body and you're looking, and then that's where the idea you're looking for some kind of optimal grip where some kind of effectiveness and not something like grasping where you're misunderstanding things to where you're having unrealistic hopes or you're not able to communicate effectively. There's a lot of different aspects to each experience that you would like to, yeah, to have it be the best experience possible, including all the disappointment and everything that is going to come along, but can kind of have the best understanding of that and not be, yeah, I keep going for that word grasping. I like that word, not be grasping for it to be something else, for you to be something else.
Yeah, because it's easy to say in Buddhism that, like as a critique of Buddhism, that they're very negative, and that it's everything's suffering, and it's all so well you
Hmm.
don't ever get anything good. Um, can't you grab something and make life better for yourself? Like, what's wrong with that? Um, and what's wrong with that is only that when we get the thing we've been grasping after, we forget that we thought we were supposed to be happy, and we start grasping for something else. And that's the cycle that you're trapped in. And when it comes to the Buddha, I I believe one way to word his solution to that is to look at the experience that you unconsciously label as myself. So it's the thing that you're just sort of like, yeah, that's me. That's me. What is that? Because because if we want a thing, say say we want the neighbor, we want to get the neighborhood together because somebody's having problems. Um, or yeah, I guess we'll go with that. So well, hmm,
Should we
this may
make it
not
a
be the best
specific
segue.
problem or?
Yeah. Do you have one?
Oh, I can just think of like, can you think of like noise complaints or fireworks or something like that? Dog barking. I don't know. It's common
Yeah.
things.
So 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 in that moment, let's say a dog barking. That's a pretty good one. Um, so let's say there's a dog barking outside and it's barking, and the owners aren't paying any attention to the dog. Most of us, myself included, will respond to that. There's this barking. I'm trying to do what I'm trying to do, and the barking's causing some dukkha. I'm trying to write something for my newsletter or whatever. I'm trying to have a conversation with my wife, and the dog won't stop barking. And so there's this rubbing right there. There's this rubbing. So we can get up and we can go and we can yell, "Shut your fucking dog up." We all know that doesn't quite work, but it's an expression. And that's the expression is, I am irritated by this dog and you need to do something about it. And that's not entirely wrong, right? Like dogs ideally are happier when they're trained, and people who own animals should care and train for their animals so that it creates a more harmonious thing. But if you go over and you talk to them and you're like, why don't you take care of your dogs? What's wrong with you? They're going to say, well, fuck you, it's my dog. And there's going to be this argument there.
Mhm.
There's a reason that most times people are just like, well, I guess I'll just sit here and let the dog bark. Nothing you can do about it. You know, all of that is based on a limited view of, there is this stimulus happening over here that is causing irritation here. I don't know how to deal with this irritation. I can't sit with it. I can't, this dukkha is having me grasp for quiet, and I have to create quiet, and I have to go out from this place of irritation to attend to this thing. And if I understand Vervaeke, what he's saying, it's sort of like, well, you want to get better at doing that. Um, find more skillful and wise ways of doing that. And you do that through thinking about it, you do that through examining it, you do that through like, well, okay, so if I'm this person, what does it mean? And you sort of run through all of that. In Buddhism, the path is not one of, I have this problem, how do I think my way through it? How do I have a better grasp of the situation? It says, if you look at the experience of the one who is irritated, the all of that wisdom that you're trying to create is already present. It's already kind of there. Um, and the the grasping of the concept of myself as something that is irritated is what leads to all of the problems that come from that. Um, so the route to wisdom is through examination of the self, um, the self concept, the way that we view ourselves, the sort of unquestioned labeling of our experience as this is mine or this is not mine. And it is famously the Buddha, well, I don't know about famously, but the Buddha was once asked um, whether or not there is a self. And he taught that all phenomena are anatta, which means no inherently abiding self. Everything is dependent, everything, including what we think of as ourself, me, is dependent on conditions, is just arising in this moment, um, and has has nothing inherently true or real about it, separate from all of these conditions, and the conditions are changing all the time. And what we want is not to create a perfect self, but we want to have a right relationship with these conditions.
Yeah, that sounds right to me.
So it's a question of looking at the self concept very deeply in meditation and learning about it and seeing what is true and what is not true, what is permanent and what is not permanent,
Hmm.
and learning to differentiate between experiencer and experienced at a finer and a finer and a finer level. Because what the Buddha says is that ultimately there is no experiencer. There is no self that is having an experience. It is simply awareness being aware. It's not even that. It's so hard because you can't really put it into words. It's something that through repeated investigations reveals itself to you.
Hmm.
And I can't, I suppose that's enlightenment. I can't make the claim that I understand that, but I
Hmm.
know the direction in which it points.
Hmm.
And what I hear in that I don't under I've never talked to Vervaeke about it, but what I hear in this particular recording of the class um, on the podcast app is not that. It's not a refinement of the view of the self. It's a understanding of suffering and an engagement with suffering as an agent in an arena and learning to act with wisdom and clarity. And Buddhism says the arena is an illusion. This life is a bubble on the stream. It's going to pop. It's a rainbow in the sky. It's insubstantial. There's nothing to it. And that's the view. That's the teaching. This isn't a belief that you have to say, "Oh, I believe this, and therefore I'm a Buddhist." It's like, no, we're telling you this is the case, and you have to discover that for yourself.
Hmm.
So they're saying it's a scientific fact, if we were going to
Hmm.
put it in Western language. It's a scientific fact that the world you experience is insubstantial, is a soap bubble. It's a scientific fact that the thing you think of as yourself is simply a conglomeration. It's a skanda was the original term for it. It's a
Hmm.
it's a whirlwind. It's a nothingness that has gathered all of this stuff around it and is swirling, and we take that to be a thing, and it's just a lot of independently arising temporary things that are arising and passing away, arising and passing away. Some of them stick around for a long time. Some of them we don't know how to relate to. Some of them are grasped onto that causes suffering because they're going to go away. But
Hmm.
we still try and create these things. And the development of wisdom in a Buddhist context is the refinement of that view until, especially in the Mahayana, they say that form is emptiness. Uh, what there's I was going to bring in the thing, form, conception, discrimination, awareness, and perception. So form being like a solid thing, and that could even just be a solid concept, you
Hmm.
know. Discrimination being this is good, this is bad, this is inherently good, this is inherently
Hmm.
bad. No, that's just something that's arising. um perception. Oh, I am perceiving that light up there as a thing. That perception, that's an illusion. That's just something we've created out of data that's flowing through us. Um, and then even awareness is supposedly empty of anything inherent, is just a flow. Um, and not a flow state, not a state that a higher state that we achieve, but actual reality, the way it actually is flowing all of the time. And the fact that we think it isn't is something to be undone, not something to be overcome and gotten to something better than.
Mm.
So it's a returning to sort of your original nature. In Zen, they talk about the face you had before you were born as sort of an example of that, you know.
Mm.
Um, I think. Again, that's a koan, so a
Mm.
little above my pay grade, but I do
Mm.
think that for me, that points to the idea that
Mm.
um, the thing that I think of as myself is really a very persistent illusion that I often suffer from.
Mm.
Um, in the same way. So another Buddhist teaching story that I think is Theravadan, is I think is very early Buddhism, is the story of a man who wakes up at night in his hut, and he looks over and he thinks he sees a snake, and he freaks out and he runs out of the hut. He doesn't want to deal with the snake. The snake's going to bite me. He runs out of the hut, and he spends the whole night, out in the forest in the cold. Um, and in the morning the sun comes up and he comes back in. He's like looking around and he sees that it was a rope. It wasn't a snake. It was a rope. And he's like, "Oh my God, I got all scared. I got all scared about this rope." Now, I think you can take that story to mean, oh, when you have a better understanding, if only I knew, if only I had the knowledge that this snake was a rope, if only I was smart enough, then I wouldn't be afraid of it, you
Mm.
know? And we sort of see ourselves in that story, we see ourselves as, oh, one day I will be smart enough and I will understand these things.
Mm.
And I think for me, what that story points to is sort of the reverse, that a lot of the things I am terrified of right now, a lot of the things that drive my behavior and that I believe to be true are not what I think them to be. And so it's not a question of obtaining the learning the right answer, learning to memorize, oh, it's a rope, it's not a snake, learning like in that sense. It's unlearning. It's like, oh, this self that I feel all of this anger when someone corrects me. I feel this strong discomfort in my system. Why is that? Do I need to learn what do like do I need to learn some fact? And then I'll have the right fact and then no one will contradict me, you know. But if you can look at like the thing that is feeling offended, like what is that? Where is the pain? What is it that's threatened? Eventually you can sort of unlearn to identify with the knowledge that's being critiqued. So somebody could watch this podcast and say, I'm full of shit. And I'd probably be kind of bothered by that because I value my perspective. I developed it over time. But to the extent that that upsets me, shows that I've decided that this understanding is somehow me. I've identified with it. It's somehow me. It's somehow, if the thing is threatened, then I am threatened. My life is threatened. My continuity is threatened. And I respond to it from the place of, you're threatening my life. I have the
Mm.
emotional response of, how dare you? How
Mm.
dare you question me? How dare you call me wrong? Because I've invested so much of my time into this perspective. It must be true. Otherwise, my life has no meaning.
Mm.
There, that's not real. That's to be afraid of a rope as a snake. That's to take some random information that I've managed to gather and to turn it into the truth, um, and to have to defend it, you know? But I don't reach that by anything other than investigating what's already going on and shedding everything that I hold to be true rather than developing further philosophies.
Mm. Yeah, thank you. I really like that. Um, yeah, that's great. I was thinking, the barking dog, neighbor's barking dog kind of example we were using. I think, yeah, it is very important to look at all your reactions and yourself and you're offended and things like that, and to try to decide on a best course of action. And I don't, maybe I'm projecting some of my own just thinking here, but I think of the optimal grip and the agent arena thing is like you are a neighbor there to another neighbor, and you have a consciousness, and you kind of want to decide what to do, whether to just examine yourself or to examine yourself and also to maybe go talk to the neighbor, et cetera, et cetera. There's not three or four options. There's many, many options to, many things to decide. And I thought maybe with the agent arena and optimal grip ideas to like kind of feel through the best thing. You won't be thinking of in just like a robotic like way when neighbors have a barking dog, they shouldn't do that. Someone has to tell them something. It's not simple like that. It's more like you've had 17 interactions with this neighbor. You've heard tell a little neighborhood gossip. You've, in those 17 interactions with the neighbor, you've had many impressions of who or what they are. They've made little references, blah, blah, blah. You have certain prejudices that come into play, et cetera. There's just so many things. And I thought of that whole thing as like the agent arena. And like in this, we are looking at it as a situation where where the dog is barking and stuff. And there may be, you have heard other people complaining about it and sort of being bothered by it, starting to ostracize this person or something. And I thought of that as sort of like the agent arena kind of thing, including, yeah. And I thought what you said about what you just were talking about with like examining the self, I do think that's so important. And it does seem like if you're on the way to kind of some kind of realization of your true nature or nature of not having a nature, I have sensed and I do still sense there is yeah, something like what feels like freedom, uh to act in a good way in the world, with less, yeah, with proper emotion, with less angst, or yes, searching for meaning and being like uh dominant or strong, or something like that, and kind of feeling out the best way to kind of to deal with this. And I was wondering, in that example of the barking dog, I mean, you talked about the sort of reactions of the self, like offense or something like that. Um, but on a basic physics level, isn't there also just certain things that, that are better that we should address? Like if you can have like if you could figure out a way and it did work to go talk to the neighbor, and you started having a little better relationship with them, and maybe helping them to be a little more, have a better attitude, and to know better how to deal with a dog. And you're not having, when you're trying to do other things, you're not having the input of the barking dog. Or I was thinking we could make the example like, I mean, someone is hitting your car every time they park, or and they're eventually, I mean, we could say someone is hitting your body or something, and they're just like disturbing your ability to be a better person in the world. And if you could get rid of that, you can think of it in terms of disease. I mean, it's may be good in most cases to, if I can, uh, in a fairly non-obtrusive way, to get rid of the disease rather than go through life with a diseased body. I can. It's maybe better to be healthy. And obviously not in all cases, and you don't want to dedicate your life to the health of the body. Of course, I'm not saying something like that,
Mhm. Mhm.
but yeah, what do you think about all that?
I mean, I think there's definitely a danger of misinterpreting. I'm not saying you're doing this. I'm saying a lot
Mm,
of people do this, and I think I did this a lot at the start as well. Um, but because you're talking about it theoretically, and I'm talking about it practically, and trying to apply these things practically does run into the danger of passivity, of like, oh, everything just happens to me. Because that is what you do when you meditate. You are there and you are present for everything that is happening to you. And the Buddha taught meditation. The Buddha taught suffering and the freedom of suffering. The Buddha didn't teach you how to not get hit by a dude. The Buddha didn't, well, I guess the Shaolin people kind of teach you that, but that's a later thing. The Buddha didn't teach you how to park a car. Like that wasn't what he was interested in doing, you know. Um, my guess that where the two meet is something like if you want to find the right solution to the best possible outcome, the best thing you can do is start by or have already developed
mm,
an ability to drop yourself. And that's not to say ignore the feelings that are coming up in your system. You do pay attention to those,
mm,
but it's to stop, to learn how to stop being so myopic, being so focused on this feeling that you cannot hold this feeling and the truth of the neighbor with the dog, the truth of why the person is continuing to punch you. Um,
mm,
if we look at it from the point of view of like the first thing that comes to mind for me, if somebody's continuing to punch you, is like, oh, it's a bully. Why are you hitting yourself? Why are you hitting yourself? Kind of a thing. Um, because that's kind of I mean if you're an adult and somebody's punching you you're either fighting or you're running away like you're not you're not really going to just sit there and be punched but I guess that's why that comes to mind but in that case like as a kid you can get caught up in like oh I have to defend myself I have to push back which can be good you might have to do that you can get caught up in the oh I can't this guy's going to if I push back he's way stronger than me he's going to beat me for sure you can do that um but what you're looking for is if you can drop the self, the focus on the self, on your own inner experience, you can see more clearly what is happening. And then and it's not a question of like, oh, and then I think about, okay, so this person's doing this and I can plan and plot this way. It's just sort of like you see it and the action arises of its own accord from the scene. That's that interdependence that we're talking about. Um, Everything arising together, everything being part of the same causes and conditions. If you can see, if you can identify with that entire occurrence of everything that has happened, you can see that if you're aware, if you can take all of that as within what you're being aware of, then there is no question of what to do. It naturally arises. Can you achieve that state all the time? I don't know.
mm,
It's not even a state. Can you uncomplicate your life well enough that you can just rest in that state? Probably. And I think a lot of people do. Can you maintain that all the time without being caught? No, I think that's why it's a practice. I mean, maybe if you're fully enlightened, maybe if you're the Buddha, for sure. Who knows, 2,500 years ago, who knows?
mm,
For us humans nowadays, having that as a goal is kind of ridiculous. You're probably going to get caught up in stuff, probably be okay with that. You're going to have a better life if you're willing to accept the fact that it's going to happen. And in that moment, know
mm,
you have a practice you can fall back on that you can rely on. But
mm,
it's a practice of letting go and letting be and letting arise, recognizing the suffering, recognizing none of these things are inherently separate from the other things. None of them is a concept in and of itself. Everything is always already impacted and affected by everything else that is going on right now, whether you know it or not.
Yeah.
Inhabiting that space, which is the truth, that's the objective scientific truth of the situation. That
Mm,
includes your subjective experience, doesn't
mm,
exclude it because it's not important, brings
mm,
that in because it's important,
mm,
and the other person's subjective experience, and all of that is one cohesive whole, then it's a lot easier to know what to do. It's a lot easier to take action in a wise and skillful way without having to plan it out or think it out or rehearse it or have the notes that you refer to. Okay, what was I supposed to do? Because that's a focusing on a thing. That's creating another thing that's going to beat this thing when none of them are things at all, really. And if you can inhabit the space where none of them are really things, everything's then you're already at a place where everything's a lot smoother. You're in that flow experience, but I wouldn't call it the flow state because there's no person having it apart from the experience. A
mm,
state is something that happens to a subject.
mm,
I mean, I guess an experience is something, but an experience that's just happening on its own without anyone experiencing it, separate experiencing it. I mean, that's where you get right down to like trying to fit the two magnets together in Buddhism. Like it's very hard to get to talk about this in a way that isn't pointless.
mm.
So,
Yeah, that seems like a good starting point. Yet, kind of, I don't know, realizing what's happening within you and yeah, not going from a sort of self-interested s- perspective. Acting like in the dog barking example, neighbor's dog is barking, acting, starting to get an us versus them kind of mentality, and building up your anger, building up your arguments as to what you should do, what you should say, zinger that you should use, things that you can do that you can later justify malicious gossiping to others about them. Yeah, building up this something like a little war with your
mhm.
neighbor from the dog barking.
Yeah. Whereas, in Buddhism, especially in Zen, they talk about beginner's mind and cultivating beginner's mind, which is really like letting all of that go, recognize, okay, this dog is barking. Okay, that if that were to continue, that would be likely problematic. Okay, I wonder what I do about it. I wonder what I do. And going over there with that kind of mindset of like, okay, like there is arising in this moment, there's a movement. I'm not quite sure what it is. There's a movement towards the dog, towards this barking dog.
Mhm.
And as you go over there, like you may notice, um, I'm trying to extend the example here. Like
Mhm.
you may notice that like the guy's car, which he used to keep really nicely, is really beat
Mhm.
up. You may notice that there's piles of garbage outside of the house. So you may be like, oh well, maybe he's having a hard time. I wonder what's going on. You may be like, oh, he's super depressed, or he lost his job, or there's a reason he's not taking care of the dog, or um, and not so much as a like, oh, I should have known that ahead of time. I need to study things better. It's an
Mhm.
engagement with the reality that's already going on.
Yeah.
And as you engage with that further and you don't centralize back onto how it affects me,
Yeah.
and you don't alienate the experience that's also arising inside of you, because
Mhm.
you're one with that, you're one with the environment. Like all of that is one whole symphony. It's one strong
Mhm.
thing together.
Mhm.
Um, then, you know, sort of the situation, which includes you and the person and the dog, will take care of itself if you
Mhm.
don't separate anything.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, I really like that kind of idea of the beginner's mind. I was even thinking of like the sound of the dog barking. I mean, is you could even not, it sounds kind of, I have a perception, it sounds kind of stupid the way I'm going to say it, but It's like it's just it's you can hear the sound itself and kind of just hear it, and even without kind of labeling it as a dog barking. I mean, it is literally this animal making this noise, but and like kind of just listening to it, and maybe you're separating out your irritation from the sound itself. And in beginner's mind, just like thinking also maybe like a child's perception, like some things that children say make you sometimes, I don't know if you say prick up your ears or you notice it because, yeah, they're perceiving it in a totally different way than you without the built up conceptions that you have and the built up conceptions, reactions, and you're ready to act on it. You're starting to look at it, if not fully, as a thing, an object, technology to use or discard or have attitudes about or categorize and blah blah blah. But children will sometimes, yeah, view it in a different way, and something like that, yeah, seems very, very useful. This whole conversation, I was thinking of an example I read in a book called Mastery by, I think, Leonard Schlein, something like that. He's like an Aikido master. I think he's like Western, but he lived in Japan for a long time. And he talks about being, maybe, I don't know what era this was, excuse me, but being on the subway in Tokyo, and there was this, it was at night, I guess, and this young, big, drunk guy came on, and he was harassing people and kind of making people scared and offended and everything. And the author at that time was practicing martial arts a lot, and he was like ready to like beat him up, or at least take him down and everything, kind of getting ready for that. And then this like old man uh was like come here, like come over here, come sit down over here, and like totally not angry, not just totally friendly, just nice, just totally. This reminds me of dialectical behavioral therapy of like oh god, I'm going to forget the term now. I haven't worked in that field for a while, but it's basically like ignoring the story that is building up emotionally, and just like changing the story completely, like you cut off the page, and you're writing a new story now with the same elements. um but and that's what the old man was doing. He's like, come here, come sit down, come sit down, just totally friendly, totally nice, like like he's just a nice person. He just wants to come sit, and just started chatting with him. I don't know if he started saying, I can't remember what he said, like some, maybe something about you look like my grandson or blah blah blah, but he just totally ignored the supposedly appropriate response of fear and anger, and of course, caveat, I'm not saying if this guy is had a gun or a knife, or he was literally beating the crap out of someone, or that you just totally ignore that or something. Let's I hope we can always caveat things with common sense in our conversations. I mean, we don't, it goes out on the internet, so, but
Yeah. I mean, we always got to cover it a little bit, but I think it's fair to say. Yeah. Yeah.
and yeah, I was just honestly, I'm just so inspired by that example. I kind of hope I could someday be a little bit, be maybe a lot like, but at least a little bit like that old man, and have that, just the seeing through the drunken aggression to like the human being that's maybe lonely, or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think hmm, because that is very beginner's mind. It's just being in the situation without the preconceived notions of drunk man, without the preconceived notions of violence, without the preconceived notions of like, oh, I need to cower. I need to, it's like all of that's a heuristic, I guess. Those are all heuristics from what I understand from the Vervaeke thing. It's not a term that I'm familiar with. They're all strategies we've created as shortcuts so we don't have to think about everything.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that something I something that's not included in that story that I think is an important part of the equation, which no complaint. It's hard. You can't include everything in the story. It's not saying the story is problematic. It's a great
Hmm.
story.
Hmm.
But to further develop it is not everybody can do that. And if you try, like, oh, hey, buddy, come sit by me. But if you're feeling fear, or
Yeah,
if you're feeling
that's
like
right.
I'm going to control this guy, especially somebody who's drunk, who's is kind of in their instinct, in their they're just going to pick up on that, and they're going to like, fuck you, man. I'm going to sit by you, you fucking
Yeah,
old man, and
that's
they
right.
might come over and start harassing you,
Yeah.
right? Um, so it can't just be a further heuristic that you're applying,
Yeah. Yeah.
because or at least an intellectual strategy, you have to genuinely be simple. You have to genuinely be okay. The like I was saying before, the reality, like with the dog, the reality of the situation is I am here, that person is there, they're behaving in a way that is causing, you know, suffering for these people. What he's causing it, and this isn't something that you think about. This is the truth of the situation that through training you just naturally see,
Mm.
right? He's causing suffering because he's suffering. Being drunk is suffering, being drunk, the desire to get drunk comes from suffering.
Mm.
So he's probably having a hard time, you know? And from that place, once you see him as somebody who's having a hard time, hey man, come on, come and sit over here. Like, what's going on? Like, not even what's going on, tell me about it, but just like, how's your day been? Like, you see him, you experience the truth of him as a suffering being, and compassion naturally arises genuinely within you. That's just part of the interdependent arising, everything being interdependent, everything arising together. When you see the truth of the suffering, compassion will interdependently arise to meet the suffering. That's the nature of reality. You just have to be there to allow it to unfold, and the development of that over time is to my mind, that's wisdom. It's from the Tao Te Ching. They say in normal learning, every day you add something new, and in the way of the Tao, every day you let go of something that you no longer
Mm.
need. It's a
Mm.
return to that simplicity.
Mm.
Um, and even though Taoism isn't Buddhism, um, most of the Mahayana filtered through China is heavily influenced by Taoism.
Mm.
You could almost say that you have Theravadan Buddhism as Buddhism, and Chinese Buddhism Chan, and Japanese Buddhism Zen, and most other Buddhism is Buddhism mixed with Taoism.
Mm.
Because it came into China through a couple of different ways and
Mm.
developed there. Um, which actually brings me into a whole other thing that I want to talk about, but I don't want to switch subjects yet. So maybe remind me of that later, of the traveling of Buddhism and what it means to be a Buddhist, and my complaints about the sort of myopic practitioner and scholar who won't touch the practice, uh, sort of, I would call it a straw man argument that they throw up against Buddhism. So we can talk about that later, but if you have anything to say about the man on the train and the drunken guy and the beginner's mind and all of that, like I do want to stay focused on that first.
Oh, okay. Yeah, just a little bit. I guess I'm still thinking, I'm still trying to understand this idea of optimal grip, but yeah, it's good that you mentioned that. Yeah, you have to kind of be that guy. You have to feel it. You cannot try to, you've heard about this story and that now you're in a similar type of situation and you're not feeling it, and then you just try to act it out. Like, I mean, yeah, you do have to kind of to feel it, and it's hard to say how but you kind of know it. And some of it is a little confidence that's built over time. I think this sort of the Aristotelian character building, maybe like that old man has probably been in that is not the first time he has been in a sort of dangerous, stressful situation with wild human beings. He would have, you know, experienced it and reflected on it and everything, and sort of maybe he was that young man at some point, or had a friend that was like that, or it's etc. Um,
I would, if I can interject briefly, I would even say that um, if this is a Buddhist teaching story, if we're treating it as one. So I'm just going to assume, that that's sort of, you said Aikido, but like what, whatever. Just if we look at this as a Buddhist training story, like the old man meditates, he's a practitioner. That's that. Otherwise, he's why are we telling the story? And when you meditate, your own aggression presents itself and you become intimately familiar with your own aggression, your own lust, your own ignorance, your own desire, your own pain, your own suffering. You no longer try to escape it. And because you are intimately familiar with it in yourself, when you see it in other people, it doesn't trigger anything because you're already comfortable with it in here. So when you see it out there, you're like, oh, I know that. I've dealt with that here. I can deal with that there. But if you don't deal with it here, when you see it out there, when you see somebody aggressive, all of your fears around aggression arise, and you don't have the training to integrate them and meet the external aggression the way you would want to meet it. So it complicates everything gets complicated there.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah. But yeah, that's all I kind of wanted to say about that story. Do you want to talk about your argument with
Hmm.
Vervaeke and maybe Batchelor's characterization of the dualistic kind of characterization of Buddhism in the West, of sort of practitioner on the one hand, seeing it from within, and seeing it from without, scholarly kind of study, people in university maybe who don't practice.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. So that was like one of the initial points made in the podcast. And I was trying to listen to the podcast and like make breakfast and eat breakfast one day. And I was like, oh, I can't, I have to take notes. This is I don't understand this. This doesn't make sense to me because, if he's holding them up as sort of metaphors, I can kind of understand it, but there isn't anyone who, how do I say this? People do not engage with culturally specific Buddhist practices because they think the culturally specific elements are necessary. Um, a lot of people will get into that from the beginning. Like that may be the draw. Oh, it's exotic. Oh, it's something different. It's an interesting cultural thing. Oh, I've always liked Japan, so Zen's really appealing to me. Like
Mhm.
that there's a validity there, but no one who's a serious Buddhist practitioner would call that activity Buddhist practice. You are engaging in cultural forms. Um, and maybe that was true on a cultural scale in like the 60s or whenever it was well, not even the 60s, like the 30s, right? Whenever it was that Buddhism started slowly coming to the West. I'm thinking more in Europe
Mm.
than in the States, but in talking about the 30s, Alexander David Neal, some other people. Um, if that was the 30s, it was a long time ago.
Mm.
Anyway, this has been developing for a long, long time. Um, this understanding of Buddhism in the West, and the idea of there being scholars who don't practice is true. I'm sure you could find some at colleges and stuff, but there are a great number of people who are scholars and who do practice. And to say that it's a problem that we need to solve sounds to me like a, a projection of a problem from 100 years ago, maybe, you
Mm.
know. So that's kind of the place I get a little confused because to my mind, the healthy way to look at it is unlike Stoicism, Buddhism, well, I don't know if that's a fair thing to say. Maybe Stoicism also counts. So I'll retract that slightly. But I'll just say Buddhism is a living tradition. And the tradition of Buddhism is the passing of the enlightened mind of Shakyamuni, teacher to student, teacher to student, teacher to student, for 2,500 years, 3,000 years, whatever it's been since the Buddha was alive. And it is taught that it is the same mind. When you are enlightened, you have the same mind that the Buddha had. You have the exact same mind. It is not, they are not different. They are the same thing. And it is that mind that is transmitted down, which is nothing other than your true nature. It's not a special thing that you attain, but it's the realization that your true nature is the mind, the enlightened mind of the Buddha, and your true nature, your enlightened mind. It's the same mind. There's no difference. Now, the cultures that have carried that tradition and that transmission of the mind down through the years have built up those structures to support the passing on of that teaching, of that realization. If we in the West want to approach that, we don't want to approach it and come in and be like, well, all your cultural trappings are like, give me the truth. Give me the thing that's at the heart of it. Give me the true thing, because that's exploitative. That's extractive. That's like the cultural trappings were built as a structure to point to the truth, to maintain, to guide, to guard, to protect, and to pass along the truth of the enlightened mind. We as supplicants, as students, have to approach that with respect. We have to approach that with humility and a desire to respect the work that has gone in through generations after generations after generations of teachers to develop this form, and to understand that like we are honored to enter into this thing that has been maintained for thousands of years. Now, upon entering into it, meeting the culture that has done us the honor of holding it as a living tradition for us to entering into it, understanding it, it will inform us and we will inform it as Westerners, as Europeans, or whatever you want to call it. Over the next few generations and generations and generations, there will arise out of that a truly enlightened Western Buddhism that can incorporate philosophia, that can incorporate scientific study, that can incorporate the Enlightenment. I really liked when you pointed that out earlier. That's funny. But we don't get to that place by turning to the culture and saying, all of this is dumb and we need to get rid of that. And we don't study things. We just adhere to the core, the essence of the teaching, and that's the only real thing that matters. It's very dismissive. And I think it's trying to rush the process of developing a genuinely Western Buddhism because of an inability to sit with the discomfort of how long this is going to fucking take. It's going to be, I mean, I don't know how long it was before Buddhism went to China, but it wasn't overnight. And it will, if the Dharma, the Buddhist Dharma lands in the West and flourishes, it will be because the Dharma met the West and the West said yes to the Dharma, not because the West met the Dharma and only took the parts it liked and went off and ran away with them.
Mm-hmm.
That's not going to last. That's not what kept Buddhism alive for 3,000 years. You know, we have to be humble and honor these traditions the way they're brought to us and enter into them as best as we can and let them, like I said, then there's a germination that happens. Then we become more Zen, we become more Theravadan, and Theravada becomes more us. And you see this happening. You see this happening. I mean, so many Western teachers nowadays are looking at, and so many Eastern guys from Tibet are looking at like, how does meditation, what's their scanning brains, you know, they're writing in English, the Dharma, I would say, is alive and flourishing. That's kind of why I find this to be a straw man argument, because if you look at the field of engaged Buddhism and scholarly Buddhism and the practicing lineage of Buddhism, you see a lot of people doing a lot of good work already having integrated these two things well beyond well, we can't do this and we can't do this. It's like, no, you need to do both, and people have been, and there's something growing out of that, and it's a beautiful thing. And none of it has to do with belief. No Buddhist, no real Buddhist
Mm,
is ever going to ask you to believe anything. And in fact, I'm pretty sure that's straight from the Buddha. Like, don't believe what I'm saying. Try it for yourself. And if it's true, yeah,
mm,
it's the Kalama Sutra, I think. Do not believe what I'm saying. Only try it out for yourself and live off of your own experiences.
mm.
So that the to call it a belief is to kind of ignore. I mean, which speaks more to the West and our understanding of religion and spirituality and science and internality and spirituality and all of that. So it's not a wrong critique to make, but it's not a critique inherent in Buddhism, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, all that makes sense to me. I like the picture you painted of there being a natural, gradual, very full of vitality process happening. And yeah, there's an evolution there. There's a spreading, it's mixing, it seemed like everything you said, it's kind of this picture of natural growth of this, religion or philosophy or way of life or, however we want to say it. I mean, with our Western ideas of religion and philosophy being separate, it's
Yeah. I mean, you can even call it a science. There are people that call it a science, science of the
right,
mind,
yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I like that. And yeah, as you were talking, I was trying to think of maybe just from what, reading this, I could say, reading the Vervaeke and the Vervaeke's take on Bachelor, I could say, but I didn't feel like I really had a good response to all to from them. I mean, you mentioned that there's certainly some people that study Buddhism that don't practice it, and I could see how that could be like kind of a problem. But besides that, you mentioned a lot of places where the West is mixing with Buddhism and both are learning and both are practicing and people are changing, people are presumably kind of yeah, becoming better people and I don't yeah, and it yeah, so basically you're saying Buddhism is happening in the West and it is not uh it is not particularly based on a deep misunderstanding of the concepts.
Yeah. I would say that. I would say that like to the extent that there are people who are purely enamored of the cultural trappings, they're not Buddhism, they're not Buddhists, then they're not actually engaged in Buddhism. And the same thing of the scholars. They're scholars. They're studying. Maybe they're doing translation. Maybe they're doing other things. But
Mm,
even in Buddhist tradition, um, especially in Tibet, they do have strands of that. I mean, Tibet was a Buddhist nation. There was a closest thing you would have, I think, to Plato's rule of the philosopher, was the Buddhist monks were sort of the political leaders of the country, and for for centuries, um, possibly longer. But what you have there is you have different lineages. You have like the Kagyu lineage is the practicing lineage. They're all about practice. You have the Gelugpa lineage, which is the Dalai Lama's lineage. They're very scholarly. They have a lot of studying, a lot of memorization of text, a lot of repetition of ideas. They will have like philosophical Dharma combat where like you have to present your truth in a certain way, and the teacher will like fight with you. Zen does that combat stuff too, so it's not unique to them. But the balance between practice and the forms of practice, the participatory knowing and the scholarly knowing, like within Buddhism, there's no argument there. Within the history of Buddhism, there's no argument there. Dogen, the founder of Zen, had a whole lot of words to say about how you can't say anything with words. And that wasn't a problem. That's not inherently contradictory. You have to use words, you have to talk. But everything you say is problematic. And you have to acknowledge that too. And you're never going to get to a point where you've said everything properly enough that there are no more problems because life is inherently full of dukkha. It's inherently unsatisfying. You cannot. grasp something that will bring you satisfaction. And the secret of that is because satisfaction is your natural state. And so if you're dissatisfied, you've stepped away from it. You're holding on to something. There's too much. There's something in the way. You need to get rid of something. You need to find out what you're holding on to. You need to relax back into the natural state. And then when you're there, you go about your life. Chop wood, carry water. You solve the problem. You talk about that. You go talk to the guy about the dog. You welcome the drunken guy to sit next to you. All of that because you're coming from a place where you're not caught up in suffering.
Mm. Yeah, that sounds good. The only thing I can think of is maybe Vervaeke is talking about like a general understanding of, and I mentioned to this before we started recording,
Mhm.
a general understanding that lay people might have of Buddhism and how that might be bad for them in some way. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think
Yeah.
I think you're right. I would agree with that. That because this is not this is not Vervaeke's, 130 lectures on Buddhism or whatever, 13 lectures on Buddhism. It's 13 lectures on the meaning crisis, and he's doing Buddhists the favor of including Buddhism in that. And he's a Platonist. He's a classics scholar. He's a scholar of philosophy and he's trying to resurrect, as far as I understand, he's trying to resurrect Platonism as something that isn't just intellectual knowing, but is participatory knowing. It's a living. He's trying to bring life back to that tradition.
Mm,
He's not the only one doing that. There's a lot of people trying to bring life back to the West, to some of the more mystical things that got lost with the switch over into just objective rational sciences.
mm,
And I greatly respect him for that. And it would make sense that in his chapter about Buddhism, he's addressing it from a very just introductory level.
mm,
But there were so many places where the way he was using Buddhist terms is sort of counter to at least the way I understand them, just to speak for myself. I don't want to speak for Buddhism in general, but the way I've grown to understand them, it seems very counter to the way they were intended.
mm,
So yeah, so that's kind of where my critique comes in.
mm,
Um, because you do want to end the parasitic processing, but you don't end that with more processing.
mm.
Um,
Well, you don't
at
think
least
with
not
the
at
the
least not in Buddhism.
counter sort of I thought, let's see, he's trying to counter the parasitic processing with sort of virtuous processing, sort of a yeah, some sort of anagoge, some sort of yeah, ascent out of it, you know, a process that builds virtues,
Yeah, I think
reciprocal opening.
there. I mean, one, yeah, for sure. Like, I don't want to. I feel a little nitpicky to say that that's problematic, but I
Mm,
will also say that, as far as I understand it, the Buddhist prescription for the parasitic processing is stop processing so much. Um, and the source of the virtuous cycle is not a parallel process to the parasitic or a counter process to the parasitic. It is the actual state of reality. It's what reality does when we don't get in the way. And the fact that there's any kind of a problem or any kind of suffering or any kind of parasitic processing, it's because we're already processing too much. We're doing too much. We need to sort of step back. So the Buddhist metaphor, this is something I really like. Because I don't hear a lot of people talking about it. I may have come up with it myself. I'm sure I didn't. I'll explain in a second because people will be confused by that right away. Uh, because clearly I didn't come up with this. But the sort of metaphor, the poetic metaphor used in Buddhism for that process is the lotus flower, is the lotus plant, right? So it starts to understand Buddhism through the teaching metaphor of the lotus plant. It starts in the muck, in the dirt at the bottom of the lake. And so if we're going to develop this virtuous cycle, our first material that we look at is our suffering. It's the mud, it's the dirt, it's the parasitic processing. We don't get rid of it. We look at it. We take it, and then out of that will grow the stem of the lotus plant, and it'll grow up and up and up from that darkness. It'll from rooted in that darkness, not in refusing that darkness, but rooted in it. It will grow up, and it will reach into the light, right? Um, which is this is why I say like inherently there's nothing wrong, and I'm kind of nitpicking, but it's not a development of something that's apart from the mud. It's not something to counter the mud. It's rooted in inherently based in suffering in the mud. It accepts that entirely as the base truth of reality. So okay, that's there, and you grow from that. Now the thing that's commonly used is the perfection of the lotus blossom. It's a beautiful looking thing, and it's one thing, but it has all these layers. So if you look at the individual points, you're like, oh, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, there's 100,000 things here in this one flower. But it's really just one flower. It's one flower with these seemingly separate points. So there's a pointing to the nature of truth there. There's a pointing to the beauty that develops the enlightenment can be defined as happiness without conditions. You are happy. You are not bothered by, and it's not a like a dull. It's a happiness that doesn't depend on you not being depressed, that doesn't depend on you feeling a certain way. Like it's just this general, genuine, natural, genuine, natural happiness that does not require anything else to exist. And that's kind of a hard thing for us to wrap our minds around. But that's the lotus. So that's all. I didn't make up any of that. That's very common. The thing that I've not heard anywhere else that fascinates me, and I wonder if this is something that was the Buddha meant originally and just didn't carry through the years or something. But lotus leaves have a property. They're hydrophobic,
They repel
which
water.
they repel water. In fact, if you remember, the Dockers had some pants years ago. They maybe still do, but they had like a thing where if you spilled on the pants, it would just beat up and like fall off. It wouldn't soak into the fabric.
Hmm.
That was designed based on the lotus leaf. The lotus leaf
Hmm.
naturally does that. If you take a lotus leaf and you put a drop of water on there, it runs around like it's mercury. You can move the leaf and you can watch the bead of water just run over the surface because the little hairs on the plant are perfectly close enough that the molecule of water can't sink into them.
Hmm.
It rests on top of the hairs.
Wow.
To my mind, that's what being enlightened is. Everything touches you.
Hmm.
There's intimate contact, but there's no sticking. Everything just flows wherever it needs to go. And the best thing about that is if your leaf is dirty from all of the mud that it started growing in, none of the mud sticks. The water everything just washes right over it, and you don't have to worry about it anymore.
Hmm.
You don't have to brush the mud off. Like the lotus leaf like nature of your inherent, well, you don't have any inherent nature, but the
Hmm.
inherent activity that is your experience, everything that is changing and moving and growing, that the inherent nature of that is that lotus leaf nature. It is that nothing sticks to it already, so if you feel like something is stuck, it means you have to investigate there, because there's a place where you're not free. You're thinking you're not free when you actually are. There's a rope there that you're thinking is a snake. There's something there you think you have to fix or resolve or come up with a better idea then, when a better idea still is something else you're stuck to. So it's that lotus leaf thing that I'm like, if anybody knows the source of that, if there's like traditional sources talking about the leaf of the lotus, I would love to be pointed towards the sutras or the whatever, because that's something that I found out about because I think I was like, how do they make these pants do that? That's crazy. Is that like just some chemical? And so I sort of reverse engineered my way into, oh wow, that sounds very Buddhist. Oh wow, it's the lotus. How come I've never heard of this before? I maybe I haven't studied widely enough, but it's fascinating to me.
That's great. I mean, if you were the only one that came up with it or whoever else saw that, I mean, that's yeah, that extends that the beauty and the usefulness of that the metaphor. I mean, that's great.
Yeah, yeah. So I want to be a lotus, root, root to leaf to flower. Like that's to me
Yeah.
that's
Yeah, and
the
just aside from however that might relate to the Vervaeke lecture, I mean, yeah, that seems right to me that you're still connected to all the things that would make you stay in the dark and suffer, and you're rooted in that, and you're still connected to it, right? I mean, are you being fed by it almost, and like it's almost like a good thing or something, or are we going too far with the metaphor?
no, no. I think that's fair, and I think that points right back to what we were saying about the man on the train. And I guess what I was saying about like when you are familiar with your own suffering, you are not bothered by the suffering of others. And when you can
Mm,
see, experience, when you do not put a barrier of self and other between this person's suffering, compassion naturally arises. It's
mm,
not a plan, it's not a philosophy in the more modern sense that you have to think about it.
mm,
It's not a strategy, it's not a tactic. All of those things you can afterwards say, oh, yes, I saw him and he did remind me of my grandson, and I saw that he was suffering, and I felt this compassion arising. But in the moment, you're not like, okay, what do? I need compassion. I'm going to look at him. He seems like he's suffering. I will look at his suffering. Oh, I feel compassion arising within me. That compassion brings to mind that, like, none of this is processed intellectually.
mm,
It's processed on a deeper level. And I guess it's ultimately faith in that deeper level, knowing what it's doing, so you don't have to monkey around with it. And finding out, investigating the places where it's not functioning well, so that you can let go there. You can step back into your natural self. You can stop holding on to a tactic or a heuristic or a plot or whatever it is that isn't actually real, that is coming up against reality and is causing dukkha.
mm. Yeah, yeah, that sounds right. Yeah, just even on a superficial level, yeah, kind of being aware of your all, your flaws or your how much of your life story is luck, I think helps you to be compassionate towards others and to understand. And it seems like the opposite when you're taking credit for things or when you're uh, pretending certain things don't exist in your life or yourself. That's when you start to be kind of hateful or blame others and not be compassionate about them.
Yeah, because ultimately those things that bother you, if we're talking about what you just said, like the things about yourself that bother you, they're real, they exist, they're there. They're not you. Your understanding of them is incorrect, but they are there. And so to say, well, they're not there, then they have to exist somewhere. Then we get into psychology, they get projected onto other people. We attack the other people, we make it their fault. And if we just get rid of those people, then our problem won't exist anymore, except the problem is we get rid of them and the problem is still there. So then we have to go find somebody else to get rid of. When ultimately it's, if you can accept the truth of this unpleasant fact about yourself, which is a kind of suffering, a kind of dukkha, you don't have to project it on anybody else, but you can also examine it closely. You can examine your relationship to it experientially, subjectively in the moment.
Mm,
You can feel what is going on. You can feel it as an experience that's running into your awareness, and you can get curious about what is actually happening there. And the more often you investigate that level of reality, the more often you have insight, which is what Buddhism is. Buddhist practice is designed to cultivate insight. It's to realize the truth about reality, and Buddhism would use that word truth as something inherent in reality prior to the split between subject and object, subjectivity and objectivity. In the West, we think truth is objective and subjectivity is false, is problematic, is diluted, is, whatever. And but if you just sit with the actual experience of it, there isn't a separation between those two. So the fact that I can't easily walk through a wall, which is, an objective truth, the wall is solid. And the fact that I feel like I want to walk through that wall, you know, um,
All of that's real on some level.
all of that's real. The fact that I want to walk through the wall, like there's a drive there, there's something there. I don't quite understand what it is, but maybe I'm, in this story, I'm angry, like, I was smashed through the wall, right? Um, but if I really examine, oh, what is the truth of the wall? What is the truth of this feeling? I almost want to say, and this is kind of ridiculous, but I almost want to say, if I were to genuinely uncover a truth in me that I genuinely wanted to walk through that wall, maybe I could, you know, like, I don't think that's true. I don't think I would ever have that desire. I don't think that the reality of that would ever actually coalesce. But I think that to the extent that maybe in some New Age writings they talk about that kind of a thing, I think of it, whether the person writing it means it this way or not, I still think it's a good pointer because it reminds us that the things that we are feeling, the things that we label as subjective still have an effect on the world. And we discount that to our detriment. And I would say that that's the root of the meaning crisis. We've forgotten that subjectivity is real, that it has an effect on our life, and therefore all of the things that, because meaning is subjective, there is no objective meaning. You can't you have to have an experience that it's applying to. So if you're trying to solve a meaning crisis, you have to bring that subjective in, but the subjective is a problem because of the reason we ran to the objectivity as a scientific truth is because subjective truth is very, very complicated. And the only way you resolve that is through the letting go of these things and the retreat and the not retreating, but the sinking back into your natural state rather than continuing to try and develop strategies and tactics and intellectual concepts about what's going on. It's because we got stuck with intellectual concepts that we had to delete the subjective, the importance of the subjective, because you can't get satisfaction subjectively through the use of concepts. And we are so addicted to our concepts that we can't imagine a satisfaction that doesn't rely on them. But that's exactly what Buddhism offers, a satisfaction without conditions, without concepts.
Yeah.
And in fact, Buddhism says that's what we actually are. That's our inherent nature is to be satisfied without without concepts, without conditions. And that really fucks with all of our Western achievement oriented uh, psychology. How can I
Yeah.
achieve something I already am?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that sounds very good. Yeah. Well, anything else you want to mention this week?
Whew. I took a bunch of notes listening to it, but I think this is a good place to stop. Um, like I said, I have a lot of respect for Vervaeke and what he's doing. He knows more about these things than I do. Uh, Philosophy, a meaningful life, how to
Yeah.
how to teach people, all of that stuff. Um, so I have nothing against the man or his teachings and his work. I only want to use him as a foil to help explain the things that I find valuable in the hopes that they are valuable for other people too, because I find personally, I find my perspective on Buddhism to be more helpful for me than his. So hopefully that is helpful for other people as well. May all beings be free of suffering and the causes of suffering.
Yeah. Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, I really like listening to that. And I think going forward we can probably talk about some various parallels with what Vervaeke is teaching. I think, with sort of that subjective stuff, participatory knowing and everything. And yeah, it's not about concepts, not about beliefs, having a meaningful life and having a vital kind of healthy culture.
Yeah. Yeah, I look forward to that. I definitely, like I said, I have a lot of respect for Vervaeke, but I've not like read all of his books. I haven't listened to the whole Meaning Crisis. I've listened to several podcasts where he's a guest and I'm like, oh, this guy's got a lot of good to offer. Um, yeah. So until next time, I look forward to our chats. I'm going to be, although at this point, I guess it doesn't matter because this isn't live, but regardless, this Sunday I'm publishing a piece on my Substack um, about dukkha and about anatta. So it's two of the three marks of existence, and how I think that they relate and how we can you use the concepts to free ourselves from suffering, from suffering. So at the time anybody's listening to this, go check out thekindknife.com or the kind knife on Substack and look for the one. Unless I change it, it's going to be titled "Grasping at Empty Straws." So
Hey, sounds very good. Yeah,
cool,
look forward to that.
cool. Thanks, man.